Good morning. I'm Warren Hogue, IPI's Senior Advisor for External Relations, and I'm happy to welcome you to this side event to the 2018 High-Level Political Forum on Affordable Housing for All, organized by the International Peace Institute and the Kingdom of Bahrain, and co-organized by the governments of Angola, Bulgaria, Malaysia, and Paraguay, in collaboration with UN Habitat and the UN Development Program, UNDP. The countries I mentioned and their collaboration with UN Habitat and UNDP is a notable example of a partnership seeking to catalyze efforts to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs. Our objective today is to discuss ongoing and future government efforts to improve access to adequate housing and to achieve SDG Target 11.1, which reads, quote, by 2030, ensure access for all to adequate, safe, and affordable housing and basic services and upgrade slums. We will be hearing from high-level officials from the United Nations and from countries which represent different regions of the globe with sharply different characteristics that individualize what is the universal right of access to suitable housing, whatever your locality or ability to pay for it. While the event is about housing for all, it acknowledges the diversity of issues and solutions from these countries. Everyone has the right to adequate housing. However, people may have different expectations, cultural preferences, and needs regarding housing. Countries and cities also differ in their capacity to respond to housing needs and ways to do it. We will begin by showing a 7-minute video produced by the Department of Housing in Bahrain, and then hear from our first speaker, Basim bin Yaqub Al-Hamr, the Minister of Housing in Bahrain. So now, keep your seats and we'll watch the video.
Housing is a vital component of living in a safe and stable environment. And for more than 5 decades, the social housing sector has played a key role in improving the quality of life for Bahraini citizens. Since the early 1960s, the leadership of Bahrain has taken the initiative to provide suitable housing for citizens. Evolving over time, due to challenges that came with each era, the first housing development was the establishment of the Housing and Ownership Committee in 1962. This was followed by developing the new housing cities at the time of Madinat Isa, Madinat Hamad, and Madinat Zayed, in addition to tens of other housing projects that were built across the kingdom's governorates. After the independence of the Kingdom of Bahrain in 1971, a paradigm shift took place in the housing sector of the kingdom, with the founding of the country's government establishments and ministries. These included the Ministry of Housing in 1975, followed by Eskan Bank, the financial arm of the ministry, in 1979. As a result, the launch of successive housing policies started with the aim of improving the quality of life for all citizens, especially those with limited income.
طبعا كنت أنا ساكن في أجار وكان علي المكان جدا ضيق ومن بعدها انتفعت بهالوحدة الإسكانية، بهالبيت الطيب اللي فرحني، وحسيت بالفرح، حسيت بالسعادة من شقة من مكان صغير لبيت لمني أنا وأهلي. كان صراحة فرحة لا توصف.
Those housing policies and developments have contributed to providing thousands of housing services for citizens. Out of its keenness to organize the mechanism of providing housing services, offering citizens the necessary flexibility and choices to benefit from its services, the Ministry created a set of housing standards, organizing housing services according to each citizen's individual income. In addition, the Ministry provided various options for the Bahraini citizens. These are unit and apartment ownership services, 3 types of financing services, purchasing, building and renovation, plots, rental apartment services. The Ministry of Housing is committed to the principles of transparency and equality for all citizens in order for them to obtain suitable housing services. This is implemented through the electronic draw system, which guarantees equal chances for every citizen to choose the types and location of their housing units. The final stage comes with the desired outcome of the citizen receiving the usufruct contract. That's the keys to the housing unit and starting a new life in a safe environment with his or her family in their new home.
الحين أنت عندك بيتك، استقرار تام ونفسية طيبة، والحمد لله الواحد يقول الحمد لله.
The Ministry of Housing gives Bahraini women priority by providing 2 categories of housing services. These are permanent housing for divorced or widowed women and their children, and temporary housing for single or abandoned women.
والمرأة البحرينية حظيت عناية كاملة وخاصة في الأنظمة الإسكانية خصوصاً الأخيرة، وهذا كله مستمد من دستور مملكة البحرين، حيث نصت المادة 9 تحديداً في الفقرة واو على أن تعمل الدولة على توفير السكن للمواطن البحريني ذوي الدخل المحدود. الوزارة قامت بإعطاء المرأة أيا كان وضعها الاجتماعي حقها في السكن. نبدأ بالمرأة المتزوجة، أعطتها الحق بأنها تتقدم بالطلب الإسكاني سواء باسمها أو باسم الزوج أو مشاركة فيما بينهما إذا تم الاتفاق على ذلك. أما المرأة المطلقة والأرملة الحاضنة لأبناء قصر تصرف لها بدل السكن من تاريخ التقدم بالطلب الإسكاني بناء على وضعها الاجتماعي.
In the light of challenges facing the housing sector all over the world, and based on the United Nations recommendations to the Ministry of Housing in 2002 to review housing policies in the Kingdom, the Ministry has given special attention to playing a pivotal role in providing housing services to citizens early in the decade.
نظرت في الخيارات كلها ولقيت أن هاي الخدمة خدمة مزايا، خدمة تعتبر من النوع اللي يسمونه الفاست تراك. خدمة الفاست تراك هي خدمة ما تستغرق فترة طويلة، استغرقت خلال شهر أو شهرين تمكنت من الانتهاء من الإجراءات كلها بالبرنامج، تمكنت من السكن في العقار اللي أنا اخترته.
The Mazaya program has numerous features that prevents the accumulation of applications on waiting lists while ensuring a speedy service.
خدمة مزايا من تاريخ تقديمي عليها اللي هو كان في بداية شهر 1/2016 استغرقت فترة ما تتجاوز الشهرين، يعني أنا سكنت في العقار اللي أنا اخترته بنهاية شهر 3 في نفس السنة. طبعاً هاي الخدمة هي الخدمة الأسرع الموجودة والأنسب للشباب البحريني اليوم، وأنا أنصح بهالخدمة لسبب واحد بس، إن أنت لك حرية الاختيار حسب رغبتك.
The social sector in the Kingdom of Bahrain is testament to the wise leadership and keenness of the government on developing the quality of life for all citizens over a journey that started half a century ago. The effort to improve the lives of Bahraini citizens continues into the future.
Well, thank you very much and good morning.
Frankly speaking, when we thought of organizing this session, we thought we perhaps do it very early in the morning so that we have as little show up as possible. But I have to say thank you to all. The reason why we started with the film, because honestly speaking, we thought this will give a better coverage of the history and the success story in my country. Although it is 7 minutes, but I thought maybe my speech will be as low or as small as possible. If we take a step back in time, changing people's life has already started in my country. It started with a vision and an action. Vision that started with the leadership to achieve quality of life for its citizen. And what do I mean by the action? They started at that time forming the Committee for Housing and Housing Services. In fact, this has all happened in a very early time, in the 1962. The social housing as a vocabulary or as a terminology was hardly unknown and undiscovered at that time. And it was introduced at the time that we had no waiting list and we have no overcrowding and certainly no homeless at that time. That by itself is considered as a major turning point in our housing journey in the Kingdom of Bahrain. That particular decision in 1962 has changed the landscape of Bahrain forever. Bahrain started soon building its very first new town called Isa Town. In the film, we refer to it as Madinat Isa. Of course, this is so modern with modern schools, open spaces, gardens, markets, health centers, small shops and services that are just next to your footstep. And in fact, in that particular town, we built the very first soccer stadium. And since then, I think Bahrain has also received one of the football famous tournaments in the Gulf. Indeed, that particular town changed the life of people. The country realized that by measuring that the demand on housing started to go up at that particular time, and our journey has started. It started with the establishment of Ministry of Housing to be able, their mandate is to manage the housing, the social housing. Housing Bank was started, and Bahrain has also started building its second new town in Bahrain. Housing issue became so challenging, and this was the second turning point in our journey. The Kingdom of Bahrain decided at that time, in 2002 to be exact, to work or to engage or to partner with UN Habitat and UNDP to help us draft the very first strategy and housing policy and strategy until 2020. Of course, the outcome of that study was so useful that we're still embarking on it. Number one, we started drafting our first comprehensive eligibility criteria, the first PPP housing project ever in the region, and we engaged also the private sector for the first time in that time. Our third turning point in this journey happened in 2011, where the country decided to go ahead and build 5 new towns, again placing housing at the center of development and certainly leaving no one behind. And that was with the intention to increase or boost the supply to match the demand at that time. Of course, we had a true partnership, an excellent partnership with UN Habitat and UNDP, and we can easily, proudly announce that they have been a true partner through our journey. The fourth turning point in our journey is that we continue boosting the supply of the housing stock. The private sector started to take a bigger role to help in taking its responsibility. In fact, at that time, more than 10,000 units was delivered through the private sector. A new initiative, as we have seen in the movie called Messiah, it's a fast-track program. It gives the citizen access to immediate access to housing. We started a list of legislative and reforms within the ministry and within the government to allow the private sector to take extra role in doing so. What we did, ladies and gentlemen, through this journey, over 4 decades of doing business, providing housing, social housing for the citizen, we managed to provide an excess of 140,000 housing services to our citizens. We invested a little over $10 billion over this program. And we proudly can say that a little over 65% of Bahraini citizens on the waiting list, now they all own their own houses. And perhaps when I'd like to conclude by asking all of us a question. What more can we be done, or cannot be done, can or cannot be done to change people's life? Thank you very much.
It now gives me pleasure to introduce our next speaker, who is Maimouna Mod Sharif, the Undersecretary General and Executive Director of UN Habitat, please.
The Honorable Ministers of Bahrain, Angola, and Lesotho, Ms. Olga Algarierova, Executive Secretary of UNECE, Mr. Maurad Wahbi, ASSG and Director of Regional Bureau of Arab State, UNDP, representative from Bulgaria and Malaysia, Excellencies, distinguished delegates and participants, and friends, ladies and gentlemen. I'm honored to be here, and I want to start by highlighting how unique this event is. Our sincere gratitude to the Kingdom of Bahrain, here represented by the Honorable Minister Basim bin Yaqub Al-Hamir, Minister of Housing, for hosting this important side event, talking about shelter and housing. I would like also to thank the Government of Angola, Bulgaria, Malaysia, and Paraguay for co-organizing the site event and coming from afar to share with us lessons learned from your initiative on affordable and adequate housing. We have gathered here today for countries representing all regions of the globe and united towards a common goal to provide adequate, accessible, and affordable housing for all. UN Habitat is honored to work with all of you. I commend your efforts and commitments to the new urban agenda and the sustainable development goals and reiterate our full support to achieve sustainable cities with adequate and affordable and accessible housing for all. Allow me also to thank our sisters UN agencies, UNDP, and the UN Regional Commissions for the partnership and the collaboration. UN Habitat had counted on your important support to implement projects in these countries. Together, we have demonstrated how UN can deliver as one to achieve a better urban future for all. This is one of the demonstrations of One UN under the Secretary General reform. I also would like remiss not to mention and thank the International Peace Institute for hosting us today in this beautiful building and a beautiful scenery outside and beautiful weather and supporting the organization of this site event. Honorable Ministers, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, housing is at the heart of UN Habitat's work. That's why you see that is the settlement. We acknowledge that critical challenges around housing such as affordability, accessibility, adequacy, slum and inequality have negatively affected people's life and sustainability in cities. Since the inception of UN Habitat, we have worked to promote the right to adequate housing for all and assisted member states with their housing initiative using our normative and operational tools. As you know, housing issues are also high in the global development agenda, both the SDGs through the target 11.1 on providing access for all to adequate, safe and affordable housing by 2030, and the new urban agenda recognized the importance of adequate housing as a factor of sustainable development and people's well-being. These sets allow me to remind you the magnitude of the challenge ahead of us. Almost 1 billion people currently live in slum-like conditions. By 2030, UN Habitat estimates that 3 billion people, about 40% of the current world's population, will need access to affordable housing. This translates into a demand for 300 million new units by 2030. I see this as a challenge and also as an opportunity. The growing urgency to provide adequate and affordable housing to millions of households is an opportunity to overcome challenges related to environmental sustainability, poverty and inequality, and positively influence cities to embark on a path to sustainable urbanization and social prosperity. In responding to these challenges and harnessing these opportunities, UN Habitat promotes the Housing at the Center approach, which was endorsed by member states in 2015. Housing at the Center provides guiding principles for holistic policies and strategies, both for the national and local government, to achieve transformation on the ground. And in the past 2 years, more than 35 countries have benefited from UN Habitat support to strengthen their policies and institutions, as well as to design solutions to improve supply and affordability of the housing. In this connection, there are 4 principles we promote within the framework of Housing at the Center approach. First is about putting people and human rights at the center. Building houses is about building home for the people and also building community. As mentioned before, housing is more than a roof and four walls, but the right to live somewhere in security, peace, in dignity. As we develop, formulate, and implement our tools, policies, and programs, we should place people and human rights at the center of our thinking and actions. In doing so, our focus should be on leaving no one behind, and this requires our special attention to housing needs of the poorest and the most vulnerable, women, youth, and those who live in slum. Fulfilling the right to adequate housing is interlinked with other human rights. Second, housing is a vector of social economic development. The nature of the housing sector is one that touches every single aspect of the economy of a country and has interface with practically every social development sector. People living in adequate housing have better health, education, higher chances to seize opportunities in cities. At the same time, a housing sector that performs well acts as a development multiplier, benefiting complementary industries, contributing to economic development, employment generation, and poverty reduction. Third, building houses is about building cities. Because more than half of the urban fabric is commonly made up of residential areas, housing development decisions shape urban and are key to sustainable urban development. Urban planning can enable the provision of housing that are connected to livelihood opportunities with access to infrastructure, transportation, and other services, contributing to reduce spatial inequalities, fragmentation, and urban sprawl. Producing housing is affordable and easily accessible is the key to reverse the inequalities in cities. Fourth, one of the purposes of today's event is to reiterate a longer term of collaboration among countries present today, facilitated by UN Habitat with the support of our UN partners towards sharing knowledge, designing solutions, and championing changes on the ground. I would like to say thank you to the Kingdom of Bahrain, the Honorable Minister Basim, for our collaboration, partnership in preparing the national housing policy that he has mentioned just now. This is also to show the importance of national government having an integrated, holistic, sustainable development plan with policy, including housing policy, where it shows that the implementation of the policy to program and to action and shows in the video just now. There is important work to be done. I count on your commitment and championship and offer our full support to make a real difference in life of the people we serve, starting from the furthest behind. Thank you very much for the attention. Thank you.
And now we will hear welcoming remarks from Olga Algayarova, who is Executive Secretary General, UN Economic Commission for Europe. Please.
Good morning, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, and if I may tell, good friends of affordable, adequate, and safe housing. I wish to join my previous speaker, Her Excellency, Madame Maimunah Moht Sharif, and to thank His Excellency, Minister bin Jacob Al-Hammer, and the Ministry of Housing of the Kingdom of Bahrain for organizing this important event here in New York. I would also like to thank the co-organizers of this event, our long-time UN partners, UN Habitat, UNDP, UN member states, Angola, Bulgaria, Malaysia, and Paraguay. We are extremely grateful to the speakers and participants who will have the opportunity to share their valuable experiences in this event. Access to decent and affordable housing is a fundamental human right and need. The UNEC Social Housing Study finds that housing is the least affordable human right at all. At least 100 million low and middle income people in the UNEC region are housing cost overburdened. They spend more than 40% of their disponible income on housing. High housing costs for low income households leave limited resources for other basic needs, such as food, health, clothing, transportation. This means that the lack of affordable housing makes other human rights increasingly unaffordable and makes discussion on achieving adequate, safe and affordable housing through the implementation of the global and regional international accords on sustainable development very timely. The adoption of the 2030 Agenda in 2015 and the new Urban Agenda in October 2016, followed by the adoption of the Global Indicator Framework for the Sustainable Development Goals and Targets in 2017, established an important global framework for our future work. The regional framework agreements, such as the Geneva UN Charter on Sustainable Housing, which was endorsed by the UNEC member states in 2015, and the Ministerial Declaration on Sustainable Housing and Urban Development adopted in 2017 are also important tools to translate key principles of the global agreements to the regional level. The Geneva UN Charter is an innovative instrument as it promotes an integrated approach based on the principles of environmental protection, economic effectiveness, social inclusion, participation, and cultural adequacy. This integrated approach will require collaboration between all stakeholders. An excellent example of such collaboration is our collective effort on strengthening evidence-based and participatory housing policies and strategies globally, a collaboration between UN Habitat, UNDP, and the 5 regional commissions. The partnership with the other UN agencies is an asset to guarantee a comprehensive integrated policy framework. The global network of the UN partners, with its headquarters and local offices, is an excellent tool for facilitation of the dialogue with a range of stakeholders at country level, from national ministries to academia, private sector and civil society, guaranteeing a participatory policy-making process. Apart from this project, UNEC is carrying out several activities. One of the flagship products is the series of country profiles on housing, urban development and land management, a tool for reviewing achievement of SDG 11 and other urban-related SDGs at national level, and a tool for comparing the progress made internationally. Those country profiles are conducted on the request of EC member states, coordinated by the Secretariat and drafted by independent international experts. Following completion of a country profile study, UNEC monitors and supports the implementation of country profile recommendations through the preparation of national action plans, supporting development of new laws and implementation of technical demonstration projects. The most recent completed country profile is the profile for Kazakhstan. As a follow-up to the country profile, UNEC develops demonstration projects. To follow up on the recommendations of the country profile on Kazakhstan, a smart, sustainable city district project in the city of Astana is being developed. The project is expected to generate investments into the refurbishment and densification of the smart city district while ensuring long-term social, economic, and environmental sustainability of the measures. This approach is planned to be extended to other cities of Kazakhstan and will be further disseminated through the global initiative U4SSC and its network, including 15 UN agencies. We warmly invite you to visit Geneva and discuss your further cooperation. Please be informed that the 79th session of the UNEC Committee on Housing and Land Management will take place on the 4th and the 5th October at the Palais des Nations in Geneva, Switzerland. We'll also host several events during the Urban Week on 1st to 5th October, which will address housing policies and homelessness, building national capacities for housing and urban development, and sustainable real estate markets. Again, we warmly invite you to participate to these events. I wish all of us a dynamic and fruitful dialogue today. I hope that this event will help us build up on our existing partnerships between the UN system organizations, UN member states, the private sector, academia, and local authorities to continue working towards our common aim. Let us work together to address the global housing challenge. Thank you for your attention.
Our final speaker making introductory remarks is Mr. Murad Wahba, who is the Assistant Secretary General and Director of the Regional Bureau for Arab States at UNDP. Please.
Honorable Ministers, Executive Director, Executive Secretary, Excellencies, colleagues, hopefully all protocols observed, and friends all. It gives me really great pleasure to be here today to join with you. Allow me first to thank the co-organizers of this event in the High-Level Political Forum as a side event, the Kingdom of Bahrain, the International Peace Institute for hosting us so kindly. I knew that the International Peace Institute had many miracles in terms of peacemaking and peace building in its long history. I didn't know that weather was one of them. What we are doing today is looking at nothing less, I believe, than the future of development and the future of our common humanity. And that is not because we are here in this context discussing housing and affordable housing and therefore tailor our ambition to the event, but really because in the next few years, the majority of the world's population will be living in an urban setting, a feature that we have today in the region where I serve, the Arab region, where at least 2/3 of the population lives in an urban setting. In this context, I think the comparative experience of different countries, different areas, is very important, not only because of the importance of housing itself, but because of the central position it holds for all of us engaged in development cooperation. Yesterday, Bahrain, the Kingdom of Bahrain presented its voluntary national review in the High-Level Political Forum. And I'm very glad to see, as of yesterday and today, the very strong commitment to housing as a human right. And indeed, as you have said, Executive Secretary, as the foundation for the achievement of all human rights. So congratulations on that. Allow me, if I may, to raise a few points. But first, perhaps if you allow me, Mr. Hoog, just one reflection on the video we saw. And I think a reflection which is the more important because it hasn't actually been addressed directly, and it's also not in my notes, so I thought I'd extemporize on that one. I would really strongly congratulate you on the importance you give to the role of women in housing and to particular attention to the gender dimension in the solution of housing crisis. This is something we all need to do and we need to learn from you. So thank you. So with that, if I may, perhaps three very broad points as a start of your discussion, and then I won't take much more of your time. The first is that adequate, affordable, and safe housing is not an economic or an infrastructure issue. It is an issue of poverty and how we deal with poverty. Poverty rates in many cities are low compared to poverty rates prevailing, say, in rural settings. However, poverty in many cities is becoming an urban agenda with the prevalence of slum dwellers, for instance, and the very particular challenges that slums pose to our understanding of urban space and our approach to dealing with poverty. To ensure that the urban poor, in particular, are not left behind, we need to understand who the urban poor are, where they are found, and what the drivers and determinants of poverty in an urban setting would be. A second broad point, if I may, is that housing is a resilience issue as well. With the growth of cities and with the increasing urban population, the exposure of these people to climate and disaster risk also increases. Concentration increases risk. And today we have about 500 million urban residents around the world living in coastal areas and increasingly vulnerable to storm surges and the rise of sea levels. So there is a very close link between the urban agenda and the resilience agenda. Promoting disaster-resistant construction practices, for instance, through the improved planning of land use, through the development of building codes, through risk assessment and disaster databases, must inform urban planning in the future if we are to ensure safety. This, I think, is brought more to the point when we look at the increasingly vulnerable poor in urban settings, who are much more vulnerable, of course, to urban disaster risk than the better off people. And third, housing is a governance issue, because housing and urban settings allow us, and I'm speaking here in front of the mayor of the world, because I believe that within cities we are afforded much greater opportunities for political participation, but indeed even greater challenges for this political participation in how people manage their own lives and people how organize services which they are delivered, etc. Perhaps, if I might be allowed to conclude on two different aspects. The first is the centrality of housing and an urban agenda for the achievement of human rights. But the second, and I think you referred to it, Executive Secretary, is the commitment of the United Nations to work through an urban agenda. And I hope, Mrs. Mills, that I'm not perhaps revealing too many secrets when I say that the Secretary General has instructed us to ensure that the new urban agenda is at the heart of the new UN Sustainable Development Frameworks and at the heart of all our collective work in countries. I thank you.
How we're going to proceed now is to have a panel session divided into three segments. The first segment is vision and key achievements. And the panelists who I'm about to introduce to you, I'm going to ask them a question and ask them to answer that question in 3 minutes. And that's an unusual thing at the United Nations, but if we do it that way, everybody will get a chance to speak. And most importantly, we will have time at the end to involve those of you in the audience. Access to adequate and affordable housing is recognized in many international instruments, including the SDGs and the new urban agenda adopted by member states in Quito in 2015. Issues related to affordability, growing population, migration, and climate change all concern housing somehow and add to everyday challenges of every decision maker. We also know that we learn from each other's challenges, sometimes even more from each other's achievements. The panel that has joined me here, starting on the right and moving this way, the first person is Ana Paula Chantra Luna de Carvalho, who is the Minister of Territorial Planning and Housing of Angola. And by the way, there are translation microphones on your seats. Number 1 is English and number 2 is Portuguese. The second person I will be calling upon is Habufano Lehana, who is the Minister of Local Government, Chieftainship and Parliamentary Affairs of Lesotho. The third person we have met already, and we welcome him back, is Minister Alhamar of Bahrain. And finally, Nicolae Nankov, who is the Minister of Regional Development and Public Works of Bulgaria, represented here on the panel by Krasimira Beshkova of the Permanent Mission of Bulgaria. So the four of you, starting with Ana Paula Chantra Luna de Carvalho, would you answer this question, please, which is, what would you say are the main achievements of your country in terms of improving access to adequate housing? And again, if you could answer in 3 minutes, that would be great, please.
Thank you very much. The main challenges that we face in our country for access to housing are that we still do not have the offer to meet the demand. We have the National Urban Planning and Housing Program that was launched in 2008. We have built more than 350,000 units, but these units covered mostly the middle class. So our main challenge today is to reach the lower economic groups. As you know, Angola went through a long period of war. So the housing that we had was from the colonial times. There was some construction, but very little. Then after the program was launched, we were able to address the housing issue a little bit. We have 164 cities, and of those, 130 benefited from a program with 200 housing units, with larger numbers in the capital, but neither the lower nor the middle class were able to be reached. Our main concern at this time is to offer more housing to the lower classes. I saw the video from Bahrain, and I will share their experience in my country and work with women as well. We have worked with the youth. We have worked with women, not as specifically as the Bahrainian experience. So we would like to devise a program focused on women. Thank you very much.
Obrigado, thank you. Yes. Actually, what I'll probably tell you to do is not to applaud now because we have lots of speakers who will applaud at the very end. The second speaker, that same question, is Habufano Lehana, the Minister of Local Government, Chieftainship and Parliamentary Affairs of Lesotho. Once again, the question, Minister, is what would you say are the main achievements of your country in terms of improving access to adequate housing?
Thank you, moderator. Let me thank the government of Bahrain, the IPA, and the co-host for this session. And because you said 3 minutes, I think I should go straight into answering the question. The main challenge in my country as far as housing and human settlement is concerned is planning. Lack of planning is the main problem, whereby even though we have quite a sizable number of houses which are good quality, but because of lack of planning, then they turn into being slums because they are located in areas where there is no infrastructure, where it's very expensive to provide infrastructure. They're signified by a huge urban sprawl, and thereby making human settlements not very adequate. The government, in collaboration, of course, here we should thank the UN Habitat. We have a housing policy now, which addresses specifically the housing policy issues, whereby we are addressing affordability as a main target. Affordability is addressed in a number of ways. The one is to make available serviced plots and planned and serviced plots whereby they have the basic services, and then people can build their own houses. As in Lesotho, the informal sector or informal delivery of housing is very, very, very strong. We believe in my country that every man and every woman has an obligation to provide housing for himself or for herself or for the family. And you want to drive that philosophy. But then you realize with the advent of rapid urbanization and so forth, when the population increases, then you have to introduce in the issues of standards. Then you have to build houses that conform to certain standards. Then that takes a lot of people out of the affordability pocket. So affordability then becomes a problem. Then government is continually putting on an annual basis a budget that goes towards affordability, building affordable housing. The method that we use the private sector, but we use it in a manner that it delivers houses that are affordable. The site and service schemes, there is cross-subsidization, whereby you load the middle and high income a little bit more with the cost of services so that you can have the low income access plots which are much cheaper. So this has been basically the two folds that we have been addressing this. We are also bringing in the private land developers to also take care of mostly the middle and high income, while the low income is being catered for by a government parastatal organization, namely the Lesotho Housing and Land Development Corporation, which of course offers and provides housing at very, 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 very reasonable prices that everybody should access. I think that is basically what we are doing as far as it comes to affordability. We also do have Habitat for Humanity, which is also involved in providing for the poorest of the poor. There are those people who you cannot even talk affordability because they have absolutely nothing, or they have very little that they can afford any housing. So there are some self-help schemes whereby the houses are almost closely to 100% affordable, and people themselves have to provide certain equity that they participate in the construction of the houses, but they don't buy the materials, they don't buy anything. It is usually close to 100% grant. Government is intending, of course, to also contribute on an annual basis to top up the amount of money and the assistance that we are getting from Habitat for Humanity. So in this way, we'll be able to leave no one behind as you go along. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. We'll pass on the applause in order to keep the things moving. It doesn't mean any lack of appreciation. And finally, the next speaker, the same question, is our friend, Minister Al-Hammer. What would you say are the main achievements of your country in terms of improving access to adequate housing?
Yeah, push.
Green light.
Please allow me, because you did not give me enough time to say thank you for my fellow ministers, different representatives from the UN, IPI for being so kind, hosting this event in here. So thank you all, and thank you for the audience. When we talk about achievements, and we have to admit that no matter how much we achieve in the housing sector, we are faced with as much challenges as we move on. So achievement are faced with a strong challenges. So it is an ongoing exercise so that we can make sure that we succeed at the end. I explained before that we realized that at a very early stage through a vision from the leadership that housing is very important. It is an important component to the quality of life of its citizens. That's why the government of Bahrain has started strongly in this journey. As we moved on, we were faced with bigger challenges, or with challenges. I think one of the also major achievements is that we have seek the help of the UN Habitat and UNDP to support us drafting our housing policy and housing strategies. But I can comfortably say that through over 4 decades of providing social housing for the citizens, we have achieved a lot. We have built thousands and thousands of housing units. We just started new initiatives through different programs, as we mentioned earlier, to allow access to the citizens, immediate access to the citizens through access to finance and access to houses with government support and with a government subsidy. And I would strongly say that we also, one of the major achievements in Bahrain is that we have engaged the private sector in a larger scale. And we are preparing ourselves for the private sector to play the bigger and the broader role in Bahrain. And so that the government is preparing itself for the second step, where we do operate as a policymaker and a regulator in this field.
Thank you, Minister. And we'll move on to Krasmira Beshkova from the Permanent Mission of Bulgaria. Once again, what would you say are the main achievements of your country in terms of improving access to adequate housing?
Thank you very much, and good morning to everybody. Since I'm representing the Minister of Bulgaria on regional development, allow me first, before attaining to your question, to serve very quickly the protocol and to thank you on behalf of the Bulgarian Minister on Regional Development and Public Works, Mr. Nikolai Nankov, for your kind invitation today for bringing forward our common project on adequate, safe, and affordable housing. Please accept the sincere apologies of my minister for not being able to be present here today in person. And I would like immediately to express his sincere personal appreciation for your commitment, Minister Alhammer, to our common project. And I would like also very much to immediately acknowledge the support Bulgaria is receiving from the UN Habitat and from the UNDP for bringing forward this project, to which we attach particularly high importance. And I will conclude my protocol remarks, once again indulgence for them, but I'm again representing the minister, and it is quite a demanding task, of course. I would like to express our keen support for further development of the collaboration we are having with the countries involved in this project, namely Bahrain, Angola, Malaysia, and Paraguay. Thank you very much for the IPI for housing us today, and it only shows the complex and consistent commitment of the Institute towards the sustainable development. And now to your very clear question. In Bulgaria, in the last decade, we believe we have managed to bring the interlinkage between the three key policies as regards housing to a new dimension. These policies, in our assessment, are the sustainable urban and territorial development, housing, and land management. And we have worked on the interlinkages between these three policies with the view of achieving economic growth both at national and at local level. And this enhancing of the synergy between these three key policies we did by devoting our special attention to the assessment of the housing needs of the population. And we employed the following instruments: in-depth analysis, surveys, and implementation tools. So for us, our first achievement in answer to your question is the better understanding we have achieved during the last decade in Bulgaria on the housing needs of the population. And this allowed us to develop an evidence-based housing policy. And as usual, when a government's policy is evidence-based, it logically becomes financially sustainable. Mm-hmm. So our first achievement is the better knowledge and the better understanding and identification of the housing needs. As a second achievement, I would set out the involvement of the Bulgarian government in various cooperation formats, among them the one we are actually trying to enhance further today. And I will mention here, among the various cooperation formats in which my government has been involved, the new urban agenda and the 2016 Pact of Amsterdam, setting the urban agenda for the EU. Our third goal for addressing the housing needs of the population was actually to agree both at the expert and at political level on a key policy priority. And in our view, we have reached consensus in our society that the key policy priority for us is buildings energy efficiency. And once we reached agreement on this priority, we employed a wide range of legislative measures and of policies, governmental policies and programs. And I will mention among them the Energy Efficiency Act, adopted back in 2004. It was further enhanced in 2015 with the new Energy Efficiency Act, which introduced the current European requirements for energy efficiency in the buildings. And I'm actually concluding the answer to your question, Mr. Moderator, by mentioning the National Housing Strategy, which we adopted in 2004, and which main goal is to cease the process of deterioration of the existing house stocks. Bulgaria shared two small-scale pilots initiative in 2007 and 2012, and today we are already having a large-scale national program for energy efficiency, which is worth of 1 billion euros. So in concluding, we assessed better the needs, we involved in cooperation formats, and we reached consensus on a key policy priority. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Peskova. I'm going to race ahead now and condense two questions into one. We'll have the same exercise answering this particular question. How is your government coping with the affordability crisis, and what measures have you put in place to reduce housing costs? And what is the vision and key objectives of how your country will achieve SDG 11.1? And I point out in particular that 11.1 calls for adequate and affordable housing. So, Ms. Luna Carvalho, could you answer that question, please?
Mais uma vez, obrigada.
Once again, thank you. The measures that our government has adopted to reduce the cost of housing when it is leased. We have three types of housing. One is immediate payment. The other one is leased, where the value of the house is divided in 30 years, and at the end of 30 years it becomes the property of the person. And houses that are owned by the government. The measures that we adopted to reduce costs, this amount for immediate payment or installment payments, they are based on the value of the infrastructure, the connections to utilities. They are not included in the total cost of the house. The other sub-program that I mentioned, which is in place in 130 of the 164 cities. They had a lower cost of housing, which also did not include the cost of utility installations. Even if these houses do not all have the infrastructure. In other words, the infrastructure has been installed little by little. The houses were built, many with water supply, energy, but most of them do not have access to sewers. In a first stage, we are using septic tanks with plans for later connection to sewers and the paved roads. But the total cost of the house is not the cost at which it is sold to the citizen. It is a lower cost. that does not include the cost of infrastructure. Thank you.
Minister Lahan, the same question, particularly affordability.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. You said particularly affordability, but you also asked the vision. Could I touch on the two of them?
Yep.
Thank you.
You can.
The vision is that every Musoto should have access to affordable housing within well-planned settlements. And the goal here is the realization of the right to adequate housing through promoting housing as a basic right and social good, economic investment, job creator, and a strategy for poverty reduction. I'll just run through just the 10 objectives of the housing policy so that we will get some of the things that I'm going to talk about. Provide housing directly or indirectly, improve land use planning and management, improve infrastructure provision, improve access to housing finance, acknowledge and support the private sector, acknowledge and support private sector participation, improve an institutional and regulatory framework relating to housing, improve production and use of locally available material, increase priority for housing in national development, eliminate inequality issues in housing. This set of objectives are directly linked to achieving the housing for all and the SDG 11 in general. We know that housing is cross-cutting also because it has a multiplier effect on other sectors such as infrastructure, water, sanitation, energy, and more. So this policy tries to find the synergies between the SDG and the national strategies and then the housing policy. When it comes to affordability, we have facilitated what you could call a housing supply value chain, whereby we have brought in the microfinance institutions to try and finance the people with less incomes. As you know, that the commercial banks are risk averse. They have the reluctance to actually participate in assisting people who have maybe dicey forms of incomes. But the microfinances, they've got a much more relaxed approach. Also, we have introduced what you call rent to housing scheme, whereby you can rent, you start first by renting. Part of the money goes into a reserve account that after, say, 5 years, then you can exercise your right to purchase that house. And by that time, you'll have acquired enough deposit to put upfront and then get a loan from the bank. That is a wonderful scheme. We only want to expand it more so that we can make the people who don't afford and who are not what they call bankable, access finance from banks. The infrastructure, government, in the housing schemes, only basic infrastructure is provided so that you don't load the house buyers with a lot of money that they would have to pay for putting in tar, putting in sewer, putting in whatnot. So people really pay for the basic services and they're provided incrementally, as similar to what the minister from Angola says. And the one that will be applied afterwards, I mean, people don't really pay for it. I mean, it's got from other taxes. So the bulk infrastructure and a lot of infrastructure is not, shouldn't become a barrier for affordability. Government also, it is promoting adoption of affordable building technologies. We are soon going to be having a company establish a factory in Lesotho, which will be manufacturing what you call concrete panels. And that has cut the cost of housing by almost 30%, if not 40%. So these methods also are geared towards making houses affordable, and we are embarking on making bigger schemes. So when the scheme is bigger, then the cost is spread around many houses, and it's going to make it less expensive. I think with those few remarks, I have probably attempted to answer your question, but the 3 minutes is scary. You think you've gone beyond, and that is it.
Thank you very much, Minister. Minister Alhammer, a question. Again, 3 minutes. If we do 3 minutes, we're going to get to the audience shortly. Again, it's SDG 11.1, affordability. If you could just speak on that for 3 minutes.
Housing itself is a very tough business, and although it sounds like we are only providing houses, but in reality it is complex, highly technical, and it could always have a cost overrun. If we take this as a basic principle in the line of business that we are in, and with a huge demand on housing and housing units, this by itself will make it in a way or another not affordable. That's why most of countries look into other bases and other solutions. We have also went through the same challenge, and that's why we have engaged the private sector. It was a challenge for us, but it was an opportunity for the private sector to take over. And we noticed that the private sector also was dictating some pricing terms, and we noticed that this, if it goes on, again, it will make the private sector another giant monster and will not be affordable anymore. This is where the countries and the regulator and the policymaker job is to come in and regulate the sector properly, perhaps through some other means, become a facilitator, and try to also support the private sector from the infrastructure, the cost of the land, and so forth, so that you try to manage it better to make it least expensive and more affordable, so that this program's housing program can continue and goes on and on and on.
Thank you very much. Ms. Peskova, finally, 3 minutes, if you will, on the subject of affordability and SDG 11.1.
Thank you very much. And of course, I will concentrate, as you suggested, on the affordability, but I would like very quickly to mention also the vision and the key objectives. In my previous intervention, I mentioned the national strategy on housing we have developed in 2004, and currently we are engaged in drafting a version of a new national housing strategy for the period 2018-2030. And the new strategy envisages solving the most serious problems in the national aspect, namely poor housing maintenance, low energy efficiency, and overcoming the large deficit of social housing. And this, of course, we are trying to achieve by addressing the insufficient administrative and financial capacity to formulate and implement housing policy. And it is envisaged, as the last word on the vision, that we establish a framework of a national housing system that regulates the relations between the different stakeholders, states, municipalities, and citizens. And this will actually justify the creation of a fund which will finance the long-term measures for energy efficiency improvement and renovation of the housing in Bulgaria. As regards affordability, I would like to mention first that the National Housing Program targets renovation of large residential buildings typically constructed between 1970s and 1990s, and they amount to 70% of all participating buildings, and they are mainly panel blocks. The program is implemented at the municipalities level, and all 265 municipalities in Bulgaria are involved the main focus of the program is the improvement of the building envelope wall, roof, slab insulation, windows and door replacement. And actually the expected impact of the program on household is the following: reduce space heating costs, in some cases also the cost for hot water with 45 to 55%, and increased energy efficiency savings with 40 to 60%. And since we are addressing the topic of affordability, I can't conclude without mentioning the attention the government is devoted in the current and in the revised strategy on improving the living conditions of the vulnerable groups, and among them senior citizens, long-term unemployed, temporary workers, disadvantaged or disabled, young, large families, and they amount to 1.1 million, or about 14% of the Bulgarian population. So I believe these examples give you a general impression of how comprehensive and inclusive the housing program in Bulgaria is. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're going to go now to the room for comments. I've been asked to acknowledge the presence of three people in the room, and that is Mr. Aziz of Malaysia, Ms. Vera Songway of the Economic Commission of Africa, and Mr. Ricardo Jordan of the Economic Commission of Latin America and the Caribbean. Please, one other. You want to? Yes.
Please allow me also to acknowledge Mr. Mohammed Al-Mutawwa, the Minister of Cabinet Affairs from the Kingdom of Bahrain, and congratulate him for such a wonderful job that he did yesterday when the Kingdom of Bahrain submitted the VNR, and he did an excellent and exceptional job, and he's also with us, and I'd like to thank him for attending this meeting with us today.
Good, thank you. Now, if you have a question or comment, raise your hand, and I will probably call on three. We'll start 1, 2, and then 3 here in the second row. And please make the questions. We have 15 minutes. Make them very short. And panelists, if you would listen to the questions, you don't have to answer all of them, but if you hear something you want to respond to.
First of all, thank you for inviting myself and my partner, Scott Amix, to this forum. Housing is a big issue.
Hold the microphone a little bit closer. Thank you.
The particular interest from my point of view, my name is William Dahl. I represent a private investor group, is what can the private sector bring to this? I was very interested in Minister Al-Hamer's presentation. I commend the Kingdom of Bahrain on your sustainable development goals. There are initiatives right now taking place that are investable and investors are getting behind privately. I was in Dubai and I saw a net zero community, which is completely sustainable, 100%. It's solar power, 2,700 residents. And it is producing, just on the real estate, an attractive return to investors. Mm-hmm. This is how we can bring private sector money into the initiative and probably knock down several SDGs at the same time. So I'd be happy to speak with you after if you have questions, but thank you very much for the invitation.
Sure. The second person I called on, is it? Right there. No.
Yes, my name is Scott Amix, and I'm with William here in regards to sustainable cities. My question to your Excellency, Minister Al-Hamer, is in regards to private sector. To me, it's not so much about technology and the lower cost structure of building or the land acquisition or the construction. I think it has to do with the sustainability has to do with the economic model and the alliance or the alignment between the public authority, the housing authority, the private investors, and then the individuals that are the actual residents. So what have you seen in terms of ownership models that allows for a certain different mindset of the residents that aligns? And really, the housing should not be concerned as an entitlement or subsidy, but should be an asset that has accumulation value.
And then the third person I identified, I think it was, no, I thought it was.
Thank you very much. My name is Ricardo Jordana. I'm from the UN Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean. Congratulations all the panelists for the fantastic presentations. And so I'm very sorry that our friends, colleagues from Latin America couldn't make it, people from Paraguay, the Ministry of Paraguay and the representative here in New York. So maybe I'm the only one in Latin America here in the room. So let me give you a little bit background of what's going on in terms of housing in Latin America, and then I will ask
Ricardo,
a question.
very quickly, because there are lots of questions.
Very quickly. Just came back from the Dominican Republic. They just launched Habitat for Humanity with Cities Alliance and the governments of Latin America and the Caribbean. In the Forum of Ministries of Housing, they launched a hub, a platform for housing, put housing at the center of their new urban agenda. Two things from that hub. First, housing as a right, not as a commodity. That's the point of entry. And the second thing is now build a process of how do you align housing with the new urban agenda through the Urban Regional Action Plan developed in Latin America by UN Habitat and UN ECLAC. That plan has 6 main issues: urban national policies, urban legal frameworks, planning and design, finance, and local implementation. So the idea now in Latin America is how do housing connects with national urban policies, with urban legal frameworks, and how can they dialogue policies on housing with these 5 issues. And the question then, it's in Latin America, there's very much extended this scheme of subsidies to demand, not supply. So I would like to ask the panelists, any one of them, if there's some kind of similar scheme in their home countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you. In the interest of time, Minister Alhammer, if you would answer the 2 questions, both of them were sort of directed at you about private enterprise, and then I would ask the panel if anybody, one of you would like to answer Ricardo Jordan's question just now. Okay, fine. So if you would first of all, and then we'll try to get 3 more questions.
Well,
by the way, questions from women. I will accept no more questions from men.
Thank you for recognizing the private sector contribution and becoming a major player in the housing issue. As you have seen from our film, that this is what we do currently, but it's really becoming a liability. I'm sure you understand that we cannot continue the way we do business with this type of housing. So based on that, we are reshaping our policy, where we are heavily relying, or will rely heavily on the private sector. There is so much is going on the ground to change the legislations and to modify some of the rules and the procedures to allow the private sector to take a place. We mean for the next stage to play also a good policy maker and regulator in this sector. Currently, the way we do housing is expensive, and we need to reintroduce new models, least expensive, faster to do, and become more affordable. I totally agree with you that it comes to, at the end, to a business model, and that's also an important factor of the game. But as far as Bahrain is concerned, we are really serious of working more and more with the private sector, and that's by itself is a window of opportunity for to engage the private sector to come and invest in this sector in Bahrain.
Minister Lehana, if you could answer the question of Ricardo Jordan.
Thank you very much. The UN organizations usually would respond to the request of the country. My country requested them to assist with the development of the housing policy. But as we went ahead with doing that, we have discovered together with the UN Habitat that we have to link the housing policy to the bigger picture. That's the national urban policy. So we're already talking now about moving forward now to develop a much more bigger picture. That's the national housing policy. We're also looking about the national country's master plan. That's where the issue of designs, the issues of how we want to do things come in. So although we started somewhere in the middle, but I think now we are going back to draw a bigger picture. So then we can nicely relate the housing also and fit it in all the SDGs and within the arena of the human settlements in general. Thank you.
We'll do 3 more questions now, and I will accept questions only from women. In the back is 1. From Annie is 2. You don't count? There, number 3. So the first, what did I say, number 1? She wants to answer. Actually, let me do number 1 with Annie Rubin, because she is IPI social media and will have a question from somebody who has been watching this.
We have a question from an online Facebook viewer named Noamen Amara, who is an English teacher at the Ministry of Education in Bahrain. She asks how policies related to housing and sustainability promote peace. Thanks.
Okay. The second woman I pointed to, well, in the back, yes, with white.
My name is Teresa Kotura, and I represent a group here at the UN for working to end homelessness. The new urban agenda calls for improving the living conditions of the homeless people. I would like to know what steps are we taking to measure homelessness, especially street homelessness?
Thank you. Minister Lourdes Carvalho, did you understand that enough to answer that question? Yeah?
Muito obrigada. Eu não iria responder.
I am not going to answer the ladies' questions, but from the gentleman, with regard to the legal framework. Angola's constitutions establishes housing as a fundamental right. In 2009, we adopted a national urban planning and housing program to provide land to the population that cannot pay for housing, and also those that are in greatest need, to provide houses that are already built and they can pay in installments over 30 years. In addition, we have almost completed the national policy for the territory. We are talking about housing, but we need to have a plan first at the local level, even land division, land demarcation program. All of these are the result of plans, and some related to urban planning. We are approving the local level city plans, and there is always a plan. Thank you.
Thank you. The question from Bahrain of the Education Department. Could you respond to that?
Again, I'm sorry, I missed to acknowledge the Minister from Morocco for being here today. Thank you very much for coming. I would like to repeat her question. How policies related to housing and sustainability promote peace? I think housing play a major role in social justice and making the communities prosper and live in a good, healthy condition and look for the future. This is basically how we look at housing and housing sector in Bahrain, that it really plays a major role in providing or achieving social justice for people and provide them with a quality of housing so that they are they are not left behind and they become a good citizen and a productive citizen.
That's about all we have time for. I have one takeaway that I actually thought before I came in today, which is that the knowledge exchange between countries and the United Nations is crucial to achieve SDG 11.1. That knowledge exchange is exactly what we intended this event to be. Thanks to Habitat and to our friends from Bahrain, we've had a chance to do that. I thank you all for your good questions and for your attention. And in particular, please join me in thanking this excellent panel.